Bikers mess with the wrong soldiers at gas station. Today's adventure is about a group of bikers who mess with the wrong soldiers at a quiet gas station. What starts off as a simple stop for fuel turns into a dangerous situation with shocking consequences. Will the soldiers stand up for themselves, or will the bikers get the best of them? You won't believe how this story unfolds. This is a story of bravery, strength, and the unexpected choices that can change everything. It's a reminder that even in the most ordinary places, extraordinary things can happen. The bikers thought they could intimidate anyone, but they were about to find out that messing with the wrong people can lead to an unforgettable outcome. Before we jump into the action, we want to know where you are watching from. Are you tuning in from the city, a small town, or somewhere else? Let us know in the comments below. And while you're here, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories packed with excitement, suspense, and heart-pounding moments. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Now sit back, relax, and get ready for a wild ride that will keep you on the edge of your seat. It was a scorching summer afternoon, and the heat made the air shimmer above the road. Dust swirled in the wind as a group of bikers roared into the small, quiet gas station at the edge of town. The sound of their motorcycles echoed through the air, disturbing the peaceful stillness of the area. The bikers, all wearing leather jackets and helmets, looked tough and wild. Their leader, a man named Brick, was especially intimidating with his broad shoulders, thick beard, and dark, angry eyes. The rest of the group followed closely behind him, like a pack of wolves ready to cause trouble. The gas station wasn't busy. Just a few cars parked in the lot, and an old, quiet clerk behind the counter. A soft breeze rustled the leaves of nearby trees, and a couple of birds chirped in the distance. It seemed like an ordinary afternoon, but something about the bikers made the air feel charged, like a storm was coming. As the bikers parked their motorcycles and began filling their tanks, they noticed a group of soldiers sitting at the corner of the small convenience store, sipping cold drinks and resting after a long, tiring journey. They wore military uniforms, their faces marked with exhaustion, but also strength. Among them was Jake, a young soldier in his 20s. He was tall but lean, with a serious look on his face, trying his best to relax. The other soldiers seemed to be talking quietly among themselves, but Jake was lost in his thoughts, staring out the window. The bikers, who were known for their rowdy behavior, immediately took notice of the soldiers. Brick, always looking for trouble, began to make loud comments about them, trying to provoke a reaction. "What's with all the army boys in town?" Brick said with a smirk. "You guys need to be careful around here. This isn't your kind of place." His voice boomed through the gas station, and the soldiers tried to ignore him. They weren't interested in starting a fight, but Brick wasn't one to back down easily. He continued to poke fun, making fun of the soldiers' uniforms, calling them weak and soft. He even went as far as to challenge Jake, the youngest of the group, in a mocking tone. "Hey, kid," Brick called out, looking directly at Jake. "You sure you want to wear that? You look like a scared little boy in that outfit. How about you take off that uniform and come have some real fun with us?" Jake's face turned red, a mix of anger and embarrassment building up inside him. He was tired of being looked down on just because he was young. He had worked hard to get where he was, and he wasn't about to let some biker mock him in front of his friends. But he kept his cool, trying not to react. But then Brick did something that changed everything. He swaggered up to Jake, grabbed his shirt, and shoved him hard, sending him crashing to the ground with a thud. The other soldiers stood up in an instant, ready to defend their friend, but they hesitated. They were outnumbered, and they didn't want to cause any trouble. Brick and his gang of bikers looked ready to cause more than just a scene, and the soldiers knew that starting a fight could lead to more than just a few bruises. The gas station grew silent for a brief moment, except for the sound of Jake's breath as he slowly picked himself up from the ground. His body ached, but it wasn't just his body that hurt, it was his pride. He had been humiliated in front of his friends, and he couldn't let it slide. His fists clenched, his heart pounded in his chest. For a moment, it felt like everything was happening too fast, and he wasn't sure what to do. But then something changed inside him. He wasn't going to let this go. He wasn't going to let anyone treat him like that, especially not after everything he had worked for. Jake stood up slowly, wiping the dirt off his pants, and faced Brick. His eyes burned with determination. "Don't you ever touch me again," Jake said, his voice shaky but filled with anger. The bikers all laughed, clearly amused by Jake's words. Brick stepped closer, his grin widening. "Oh, so you want to fight, huh? You think you've got what it takes?" He taunted, clearly enjoying himself. Jake was ready. He didn't care anymore about the consequences. He wasn't going to let anyone walk all over him. Without another word, he lunged at Brick, throwing a punch that landed square on Brick's jaw. The sound of the punch echoed through the gas station, and everything exploded into chaos. The bikers roared with laughter and jumped into the fray. One of them grabbed Jake by the arm, twisting it behind his back, while others closed in, ready to take him down. But Jake wasn't alone. The other soldiers rushed to his side, their military training kicking in as they quickly started subduing the bikers. It wasn't a pretty fight, but it was a fight they had to win. The gas station clerk, seeing the commotion, ducked behind the counter, trying to avoid being involved. Outside, the motorcycles revved their engines, waiting for their riders to finish. The fight had only just begun, and no one knew how it would end. The chaos in the gas station was like something out of a movie. Jake and the other soldiers fought back, with surprising strength and skill, using their military training to keep the bikers at bay. While the bikers were wild and unpredictable, the soldiers were calm and precise, making quick moves to disarm and subdue them. The air crackled with tension as every punch and shove echoed through the small convenience store. Jake's heart was racing. He had never been in a fight like this before. The bikers' taunts and insults had pushed him past his breaking point, but now that the fight was happening, he felt a rush of adrenaline. His fists flew, landing punches on anyone who got too close. The bikers were rough, but Jake's determination was stronger. Brick, the leader, tried to grab Jake again, but Jake spun around, knocking his hand away and landing another punch. Brick staggered back, rubbing his jaw. "You think you can take me, soldier?" he growled, his eyes burning with rage. Before Jake could respond, one of Brick's gang members threw a heavy kick to Jake's side, knocking him to the ground. The other soldiers saw this and immediately rushed in, fighting back with all their might to protect their friend. The bikers tried to fight back harder, but the soldiers were faster, more coordinated, and more prepared. Just as it seemed like the bikers might overpower them, Sergeant Miller, the oldest and most experienced of the soldiers, stepped in. With quick, calculated moves, he grabbed one of the bikers by the shoulders and spun him around, sending him crashing into a stack of soda bottles. The glass shattered with a loud crash, and the biker lay stunned on the ground. "Enough," Sergeant Miller shouted, his voice stern. He wasn't angry, but his authority made the bikers hesitate. The soldiers didn't want to escalate things further, but they also weren't about to back down. It was clear that the bikers weren't just messing with them for fun. They were trying to show power, to make the soldiers feel small. But the soldiers weren't going to let that happen. Brick sneered and stood up straighter, brushing dirt from his jacket. "You think you've won? This isn't over. You've just messed with the wrong people," he growled, his fists clenched in anger. As Brick and the bikers slowly backed away, the tension in the air remained thick. The soldiers stood their ground, but their bodies were tense, their faces filled with concern. They knew the bikers weren't just ordinary troublemakers. There was something dangerous about them, something more than just a simple fight. When the bikers finally stormed out of the gas station, slamming the door behind them, a heavy silence fell over the room. The soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. The fight had been intense, but what scared them more than the violence was the threat that had followed it. "Let's get out of here," Sergeant Miller said quietly, rubbing his sore shoulder. "We don't want to be here when those bikers come back." But as the soldiers began to gather their things and head for the door, they heard the rumble of motorcycles in the distance. The sound grew louder, closer, and the soldiers froze, their nerves tightening. Jake turned to Sergeant Miller, his voice uncertain. "Do you think they're coming back? I mean, they said we'd regret it. What if they're bringing more people?" Sergeant Miller glanced at the door, his expression serious. "We'll be ready, but we need to be careful. There's something about those bikers. They're not just causing trouble for fun. They have connections, and if they decide to get revenge, it won't be like anything we've faced before." Just as Sergeant Miller finished speaking, a dark, sleek car pulled up to the front of the gas station. Its windows were tinted, making it impossible to see who was inside. The car came to a slow stop, and the engine shut off. The soldiers watched it with suspicion. A moment later, the car door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall, wearing a black suit and dark sunglasses. He looked calm, collected, and completely out of place in the small gas station. The man didn't say a word as he walked up to the soldiers, his face hard and serious. He didn't seem worried, even with the tension in the air. He was the picture of confidence, and it made Jake uneasy. "Are you the soldiers who just had a run-in with some bikers?" the man asked, his voice deep and steady. Sergeant Miller nodded cautiously, his hand resting on the handle of his backpack, ready for anything. "Yeah, we had a bit of a problem, but it's over now. We don't need any more trouble." The man didn't smile. He simply shook his head. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." His eyes glanced around the gas station, and then he locked eyes with each of the soldiers, making them feel small under his gaze. "Those bikers aren't just some gang looking for a fight. They're part of a much bigger operation. You just made enemies of people you don't want to cross." Jake's stomach dropped. "What do you mean? Who are they?" The man hesitated for a moment, then spoke in a low voice. "The bikers are part of a dangerous group that has been spreading fear across the country. They have connections with people in high places. It's not just about fighting anymore. It's about power and control. And now that you've crossed them, they'll want revenge." The soldiers stood frozen, the weight of the man's words settling over them. The gas station, which had seemed like just a quiet stop on their journey, suddenly felt like the center of a storm. The bikers weren't just causing trouble. They were part of something much bigger and more dangerous than anyone had realized. "Do you think they'll come after us again?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The man looked at the soldiers with a grim expression. "You've made a dangerous enemy, and when they come for you, it won't be a fight you can walk away from." The word hung in the air, heavier than any threat the bikers had made. The soldiers knew they had to prepare for whatever was coming next, because they had just stepped into something much darker than they could ever have imagined. The gas station grew quiet after the man in the black suit left, his ominous warning hanging over the soldiers like a dark cloud. As the rumbling of the motorcycles faded into the distance, the group of soldiers stood in the middle of the station, their hearts racing and their minds whirling. Jake could still feel the sting of humiliation from the fight with Brick and his gang. But more than that, the man's words echoed in his mind. "You've made a dangerous enemy." "Do you think he was telling the truth?" Jake asked, his voice shaky as he glanced at Sergeant Miller. Sergeant Miller didn't immediately answer. He rubbed his chin thoughtfully, looking at the other soldiers. Each of them wore a concerned expression, but none of them were panicking. Instead, they were processing the situation carefully. Finally, Sergeant Miller spoke, his voice calm but serious. "I think we've only scratched the surface of something much bigger. That biker gang isn't just some local troublemakers. They're part of something dangerous, something organized. We've all been trained for situations like this, but it's hard to know just how deep this goes." He paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. "But one thing's for sure, if we don't stay on our toes, we could find ourselves in a lot more trouble than we're ready for." Jake felt a chill run down his spine, His thoughts drifted back to the gas station, to the way the bikers had made fun of them, pushing him to the edge, making him feel like he wasn't strong enough. But now, with the knowledge that these bikers were part of something much larger, he realized he wasn't just fighting for his pride anymore. He was fighting for something much more important. "Do you think we should leave?" Another soldier, Daniel, asked, looking over at Sergeant Miller. "I mean, we've done what we needed to do. We don't need to stick around and make it worse, right?" Sergeant Miller shook his head slowly. "We can't run away from this. These bikers will keep coming. And next time, it could be worse. We need to prepare ourselves. And more importantly, we need to make sure that they know we're not afraid." Jake straightened up at that. There was a strength in Sergeant Miller's words, something steady and firm. The soldiers weren't just a team of military men. They were a family. And if anyone was going to stand up to the bikers, it would be them. "I'm with you," Jake said, his voice steady now. "We can't let them push us around. We need to show them we're not backing down." Sergeant Miller gave him a small smile, his eyes proud. "That's the spirit, Jake. That's exactly what we need." The soldiers knew that their next move would be crucial. The bikers weren't just going to forget about the fight at the gas station. They'd come back stronger, angrier, and more dangerous, and the soldiers would have to be ready. But what could they do? They were just a small group of soldiers, and the bikers had numbers and power on their side. As they packed up their gear, the weight of their situation seemed to grow heavier. What had started as a simple road trip had turned into something far more serious. They knew they had to stay one step ahead of the bikers, and that meant training harder than ever before. Later that night, as the soldiers sat around their campfire, their minds raced. The campfire crackled in the silence, the glow of the flames casting long shadows across their tired faces. The soldiers began discussing their next steps. They couldn't just wait around for the bikers to come to them. They needed to take action. "We've got to gather information," Sergeant Miller said. "We need to know who we're dealing with, who's behind this gang, and what kind of power they have. If we can figure that out, we can plan our next move." Jake felt a spark of determination. "I'll do it," he said suddenly, without thinking. "I'll go to town tomorrow and find out everything I can. I'll talk to the locals, ask around. Maybe someone knows more about these bikers and their connections." The other soldiers nodded in agreement. "That's a good idea," Daniel said. "We've got to use every resource we have, even the ones that don't seem like much." The next morning, Jake set off into the town, determined to find out everything he could about the bikers. He spent hours speaking to the shopkeepers, the gas station attendants, and even the farmers who lived on the outskirts of town. Most people were too scared to talk openly about the bikers, but Jake's calm demeanor and persistence won them over. Little by little, he gathered pieces of information. It wasn't long before Jake heard whispers about the bikers' leader, Brick. He wasn't just a troublemaker. He was part of a larger underground group that had been causing trouble across the country. The group was involved in everything from smuggling to illegal fights, and they had powerful connections with corrupt officials. The more Jake learned, the more he realized how serious the situation really was. Jake returned to the camp that night, feeling more anxious than ever. He shared everything he had learned with the team. "This isn't just about a few bikers," Jake said, his voice low. "This is part of a much bigger operation, and we need to be ready for whatever they throw at us." Sergeant Miller listened carefully, his expression hardening. "I knew it, but now we know what we're really up against." The soldiers knew that their next battle wouldn't just be about fighting bikers, it would be about standing up to a dangerous criminal organization. They weren't just protecting themselves anymore, they were protecting the whole town. And they would have to do whatever it took to bring down the people behind the gang. That night, as they sat around the fire, the soldiers made a pact. They would fight together, no matter the cost. They would stand tall in the face of danger. And no matter how tough the challenge, they would never back down. Because the one thing that the bikers and their dangerous group had never counted on was the strength, unity, and resolve of a group of soldiers who were determined to protect what they loved. And that strength would carry them through the darkness that lay ahead. The next few days felt like they stretched on forever. The soldiers stayed vigilant, their minds focused on the threat that was looming over them. Jake couldn't stop thinking about the bikers, and he knew his friends felt the same way. The quiet town, which had seemed so peaceful when they first arrived, now felt like a ticking time bomb. Every noise, every movement in the shadows, made them tense up, waiting for the bikers to make their next move. Sergeant Miller made sure they stayed sharp. Every day, the soldiers trained harder, pushing their limits. They knew they couldn't rely on just their strength. They had to outsmart the bikers, too. Sergeant Miller's words echoed in their minds. Stay calm. Stay focused. We're not just fighting to win. We're fighting to protect. Jake had always admired his team's unity. They weren't just soldiers. They were family. And now, as they prepared for whatever might come, he understood the true meaning of that bond. It wasn't about being the strongest or the fastest. It was about having each other's backs no matter what. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the town, the soldiers received word that the bikers were on the move. The sound of roaring motorcycles grew louder, and the tension that had been building for days finally snapped. They were here. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he stood in front of the team. He was ready. This was the moment they'd been preparing for. They had trained, gathered information, and stayed strong. But now they had to face the bikers head-on. The soldiers positioned themselves carefully, taking their places at key points around the town. They knew that the bikers weren't just going to show up and leave. They were going to try and make a statement. They had already been humiliated once. This time, they would come with everything they had. Jake stood with Sergeant Miller, looking down the road where the bikers were coming from. The sound of motorcycles grew louder, and soon the rumble of engines filled the air. There was no turning back now. Remember what we're here for, Sergeant Miller said quietly, his voice steady despite the tension. This isn't about revenge. It's about protecting this town. It's about standing firm, no matter what. Jake nodded, feeling the weight of those words. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about everyone who lived in this town, about showing them that no one was above respect. No one could just push people around without consequences. As the first biker appeared around the corner, followed by several others, Jake's hands gripped his weapon tighter. His heart raced, but he stayed calm. The bikers slowed as they neared the town center, their motorcycles kicking up dust as they parked in a wide circle. Brick led the group, his eyes scanning the soldiers as he stepped off his bike, his hands resting on his hips. You think you can just stand in our way? Brick sneered, his voice loud and taunting. You've made a big mistake, soldiers. Sergeant Miller stepped forward, his expression unwavering. We're not here to make mistakes, Brick, he said calmly. We're here to stop you. This town belongs to its people, not to you or your gang. The bikers laughed, but there was a nervous edge to their laughter now. They had expected fear, expected the soldiers to back down, but they hadn't counted on the soldiers' determination. Listen, we don't want to fight, Sergeant Miller continued. But if you don't leave now, things are going to get ugly. For all of us. Brick scowled, stepping closer. You don't get it, do you? You're outnumbered. You can't stop us. But Jake saw something in Brick's eyes, a flicker of doubt. Brick's gang might have been tough, but they weren't used to people standing up to them like this. They had faced plenty of fights, but none like this. The soldiers weren't just fighting for pride or reputation. They were fighting for something bigger. They were fighting for their home. Suddenly, a biker lunged forward, rushing toward Sergeant Miller with a knife raised. The soldiers reacted instantly. Jake and his team moved as one, grabbing the attacker and disarming him in seconds. The rest of the bikers hesitated, looking at each other nervously. They hadn't expected the soldiers to be so prepared. Brick growled, motioning for his gang to spread out. Take them down. They're not going to stop us. The fight erupted in a blur of motion. The bikers charged forward, but the soldiers were ready. The soldiers' training and teamwork allowed them to stay one step ahead. They used their surroundings, quickly taking control of the situation, using the environment to their advantage. Jake moved quickly, his heart pounding in his chest. He fought with precision, remembering everything Sergeant Miller had taught him. He dodged a punch and blocked a kick before pushing his opponent to the ground. His mind was clear. This wasn't about anger or fear. It was about focus, about stopping these bikers from causing any more harm. The bikers, realizing that they were losing ground, started to pull back. They weren't prepared for this kind of resistance. They had thought they could overwhelm the soldiers with numbers and intimidation, but they were wrong. Slowly, they began retreating, their confidence faltering. Brick stood at the center of the chaos, watching as his gang struggled against the soldiers. His face twisted with frustration. He had underestimated the soldiers, underestimated the strength that came from working together as a team. And now, as his gang began to pull away, he knew they had lost. "You think this is over?" Brick shouted, his voice dripping with anger. "This is just the beginning. You'll pay for this." But the soldiers didn't back down. They stood their ground, unwavering. They knew this fight wasn't just about today. It was about sending a message. The bikers had come to destroy their peace, but the soldiers had defended it. As the last of the bikers sped off into the night, leaving behind a scene of broken bikes and dust, Jake felt a sense of relief flood over him. The fight was over. For now, anyway. The bikers had been stopped, and the town had been protected. Sergeant Miller clapped Jake on the back. "You did good, kid. We all did." Jake smiled, feeling a rush of pride. He had faced his fears, stood up to the bikers, and helped protect the people of the town. The soldiers had proven that they weren't just a group of men in uniforms. They were a force to be reckoned with, and no matter what came next, they would face it together. It had been a fight they would never forget, and a victory they would carry with them for the rest of their lives. As the first light of dawn broke over the town, the soldiers stood together, their hearts filled with pride. They had faced the most dangerous challenge of their lives, and through unity, strength, and unwavering determination, they had not only survived but emerged victorious. The bikers, once feared and powerful, had been driven out, and the town could now breathe easy once again. But more than just winning a fight, the soldiers had proven to themselves and everyone around them that no matter the odds, standing together made them unstoppable. Jake, who had once doubted his own strength, now understood the true power of loyalty and bravery. The soldiers had saved the day, but they had also learned that the greatest battles aren't always fought with fists. They are fought with courage, teamwork, and the will to protect what matters most. As the soldiers watched the last of the bikers disappear into the horizon, they knew that, for now, peace had been restored. But they also knew that they were ready for whatever came next, together. Thank you so much for watching this incredible story unfold. We hope you enjoyed this journey filled with suspense, bravery, and unexpected twists. If you love this story, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel so you never miss an exciting adventure like this one. And we'd love to hear from you. Let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you in the next story.